Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Café on Tampa Online. Another great speaker for you here this morning, and my colleague Del's going to introduce her.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Café con Tampa this Friday. This week we have a Café con Tampa regular who has attended many of our on-site meetings at Oxford Exchange, Jean Yglesias. Jean, welcome to Café con Tampa. Jean is with the Hillsborough League of Women Voters, and today she's going to briefly describe the 6 Florida constitutional amendments that are on the November ballot. Jean, why don't you briefly get started?
Good morning, all. Thanks for having me. Just to briefly let you know, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan group. We never endorse candidates or parties, but we are political in that we advocate on issues. We also believe in having, trying to educate voters to have them understand what is on their ballots. And that's what we'll be doing today. There are 6 amendments that will be on the Florida ballot. Additionally, just want to let everyone know that the league has printed a voter guide that also has what a yes and a no vote on each of the amendments means, so that it can help you decide on how you would like to vote. And we'll provide that information later. It can always be found at the Hillsborough County League website. There is a direct link to those guides, which is www.hclwv.org.
Thank you. And we want to give a special thanks this morning to Kelly Flannery and the South Tampa Chamber of Commerce. They partner with us on a lot of events, and they promoted this event heavily for the South Tampa Chamber folks and for Café on Tampa folks. Jean's going to go through her quick presentation, and then at the end of it, if you have any questions, if you're watching this live on Friday morning, please feel free to post questions either underneath the feed or to the right, depending on how you're watching it. And if you're watching it, please also hit the share button and the like button. It helps us make sure that a broad audience sees this. We do this as a free public service so that folks can get information. And obviously, these are really important issues that we're talking about this morning. Jean, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to rush right into this and go to amendment number 1. The Florida Constitution currently says that every citizen of the United States who's at least 18 years of age and who is a permanent resident of the state may register and vote. Amendment 1 would simply change the phrase every citizen with only a citizen. There really is no reason to replace the phrase as you already need to be a citizen in order to vote in the United States of America. This is what a yes and a no vote would mean. These are the supporting organizations and opposing organizations. Amendment 2 is to increase the minimum wage to $15. It would establish an incremental increase to Florida's minimum wage starting on September 30th, 2021, raising the minimum wage from the present $8.56 an hour to $10 an hour. Wages would then increase annually by $1 on September 30th until reaching $15 by 2026. Later increases would be pegged to the annual rate of inflation. Florida's current minimum wage of $8.56 amounts to $17,800 a year for a full-time worker. According to the United Way ALICE report, which stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed, just for a frame of reference, in 2018, 46% of households in Florida struggled to make ends meet. The household survival rate for a single adult in 2018 was $24,600, well above the federal poverty level guideline of $12,760. Additionally, the tipped minimum wage, which currently is at $5.54 an hour, is set at the regular minimum wage minus a fixed tip credit of $3.02. This amendment proposes no change to this credit amount. However, if Amendment 3 passes, tipped voters can expect their hourly wage to increase because this credit is tied to the Florida minimum hourly wage. These are the supporting and opposing organizations. Amendments 3 and 4 are a little more complicated, so I'll give a little bit more information on these. This amendment proposes to replace Florida's closed primary partisan elections for governor, state cabinet, and legislature with a single primary in which all voters could vote regardless of party affiliation, and all candidates qualifying for election to the office would run on a single nonpartisan primary ballot, regardless of their party affiliation. Currently, Florida has closed primaries, which means that a voter must be registered with a party to vote in a party primary election, and the winner of partisan primary election advances to the general election. Beginning in 2024, if Amendment 3 passes, state primary elections would become what would be called top 2 primaries, in which the top 2 vote getters would advance to the general election. The measure applies only to the state legislative, gubernatorial, and elected state cabinet candidates. So again, it's state senators, state house members, governor and lieutenant governor, attorney general, chief financial officer, and the commissioner of agriculture. The amendment language does not require that a candidate's party affiliation be shown next to the name on the ballot. Not doing so could lead to voter confusion. Such a requirement would have to come from the legislature. This amendment is opposed by both major parties and some minor parties. One consequence of the top 2 system could be that major parties would get shut out in the primary, leading to a November ballot between 2 candidates from the same party. That would happen if multiple candidates from the same party crowded the ballot, canceling each other out as they divided a finite group of voters, not leaving voters with different policy platforms to choose between. The League supports the concept of open primaries, but does not support the proposal of top 2 open primaries. There's been some confusion because the League does work on open primaries, and we are supportive of the concept. We just don't feel that this is the correct solution. It, of course, would help voter participation by allowing 3.4 million of Florida's 13.7 million registered voters who are not affiliated with a major political party to vote in primary elections for the state legislature, cabinet, and governor. Let's move on to, there is only one supporting organization for this amendment. I'm sorry, there are 2 Florida open primaries. These are the opposing organizations. Okay, moving on to number 4. Amendment number 4 requires that all proposed amendments and revisions to the Florida Constitution be voted on and approved by 60%, a supermajority of voters in 2 consecutive general elections in order to pass. Currently, an amendment becomes part of the Constitution if it reaches 60% approval in 1 general election. What a lot of people are unaware of is that in 2019, Senate Bill 1794 was passed and was recently signed into law by Governor DeSantis on April 8, 2020, placing new restrictions on the citizens' initiative process, making the process more difficult. Here are just a few of the key changes made recently that are already now in law. This new law provides that a petition signature is valid until the next February 1st of an even numbered year, which prevents a signature from being held over for a subsequent election. Additionally, the trigger review for judicial review jumped to 25% from just 10% of the total signatures required to make the ballot. Those signatures must now come from 1/2 instead of 1/4 of the state's congressional districts. If the initiative does not get the approval of the Florida Supreme Court for checking the language, which is part of the process, then all the signatures that had been collected would not carry over for a second time to the second election. New signatures would be required to be collected. This would already add tremendous burden to an already expensive and difficult process for citizens to exercise their rights to decide the contents of their constitution through direct democracy. There's also concern that well-funded corporate interests would be given a second chance to defeat publicly popular amendments that initially had passed the first time around. This is the present process and just a graph showing the additional second election. These are supporting and opposing organizations. Amendment 5 would increase from 2 years to 3 years the period of time homeowners have to transfer their Save Our Homes benefits from a prior home to a new home. The difference between a home's adjusted value and the appraised value is the Save Our Home benefit. Currently, when a Florida resident moves, they have 2 years to transfer their Save Our Homes benefit to a new primary residence. The proposed change fixes a potential pitfall for portability because homestead exemptions take effect on January 1st, meaning the sale of a home late in the year would effectively reduce the portability from 2 years to little more than 1 and a few days. It preempts local home rule. Property taxes are levied by local county governments to pay for local programs and services. It takes a lot to change the Constitution, and placing restrictions in the Constitution rather than passing local and state laws limits local governments' ability to manage their budgets to best respond to the needs of their communities. The Florida House analysis says that Amendment 5 will cost local governments about $10.2 million per year if fully enacted. The League of Women Voters opposes putting tax issues into the Constitution. They feel that that should remain in the legislature. So that is why they are not endorsing a yes vote on Amendment 5 and number 6. The other thing to point out for these is that if it is to remain the way it is, there wouldn't be an impact on the current level of property tax revenues available for funding local schools and other services like police, fire, and infrastructure. Amendment 6 allows a homestead property tax discount to carry over to the surviving spouse of a deceased veteran with permanent combat-related disabilities. This discount would take effect January 1st, 2021, and remain in effect until the spouse remarries, sells, or disposes of the property, except under certain conditions. Currently, the homestead property tax discount for veterans expires upon their death and is not extended to their spouses. As with proposed Amendment 5, this statewide constitutional law limits the ability of local governments to manage their budgets. Property tax payments help local county governments pay for local programs and services. To note, homestead exemption benefits have been improved for veterans 3 times in recent years, reducing tax revenues each time. The Florida House analysis says Amendment number 5 will cost local governments about $4 million per year if fully enacted. And that is it.
Gene, let me ask you a question. You briefly stated it, but if you kind of state it very simply, the language on the ballot has to be approved by the Florida Supreme Court.
Yes.
Now, do they actually write the language?
No, the sponsors of the bill can write the language, and then after it goes through the process of collecting the signatures approved, it then has to go to for approval to be put actually on the ballot language itself, because there's some criteria. It has to deal with just one issue. And it needs to, they've added actually the SB 1794 that passed, added even additional requirements to make it very difficult for citizen initiatives, which are already very hard, but they've already put these new things in place to make it even more difficult. They've added things such as requirement to estimate the proposal's financial impact on state, local governments and the state budget, and that now needs to be added in. It requires now the Attorney General to ask the Supreme Court to determine whether the proposal violates the US Constitution. And I think those are the key highlights of the changes that were made in that Senate bill, which are now law.
Well, yes, you did a good job. But what I hear from just common folks is the language is hard to understand.
Well, and that's why these actually, you know, why the league, every time we have an election coming up and there are amendments, we research these issues and we come up with presentations to educate voters, because as I mentioned earlier, on the face of it, most ballot proposals are very appealing the way they sound. And unless you know the details and the impact, it is very difficult to make an educated decision whether you are supportive of that amendment or not.
For anybody who's just tuning in, you're watching Café con Tampa this morning. Thank you for tuning in. We've got Jean Yglesias, who's representing the local League of Women Voters, and they do an educational guide every year on amendments and other election issues. Jean, for any, by the way, if you're just tuning in, please hit the share button, hit the like button. If you're watching on YouTube later, please hit the subscribe button and like button. We do this as a public service. And if you have any questions, we've got plenty of time for questions now. Post them underneath the feed or to the right, depending on how you're watching it. Jean, for anybody just tuning in, could you just give us the quick, the league's recommendation on yes, no for those 6?
It's actually very easy. The league is only recommending a yes vote on amendment number 2, which is to increase the minimum wage over the next 5 years after the start in 2021 to $15 an hour. We are recommending a no vote on all of the others. One of the more complicated amendments is number 3, and I would like for people who are interested in really getting more information. Former Representative Sean Shaw's organization has done has published a very detailed 6-page report on the impact of what open primaries have been shown to do and how they would affect African-American candidate districts. So that's another reason that although the league is supportive of the concept of open primaries, the top 2, this is a serious issue that needs addressing and would be harmful to minority districts.
Jean, so one of the arguments about the amendments is that years ago, there was there were a whole bunch of amendments that were put in. And I think these campaigns cost in the 2 to 5 million range, maybe more, because you have to pay for signatures and you have to organize everything. But there was one that somebody put in to protect pregnant pigs. And many people have used that as an example of why we need to put more restrictions in. Do you know if the League of Women Voters had any opinion on that one? And what would the League of Women Voters recommend any protections be put in the Constitution to prevent certain kinds of amendments?
I would imagine we would have to study that. The attorney for the amendment to make it more difficult to add said that the reason is to prevent frivolous amendments. But just to remind folks, it is extremely difficult, as we know, for citizen initiatives to be brought to a ballot. And the only reason that they are done is when people sort of feel that the legislature has not been responsive to what the public would like. And the types of citizen initiatives that have passed recently are Amendment 4, which was the restoration of voting rights, the redistricting to prevent gerrymandering or to minimize gerrymandering, called the Fair Districts, and the the Clean Water Acts. These are really serious initiatives that people felt the legislature was not responsive. And we know that often these have passed and then the legislature, fights them, even though they have won by very high percentages, and supermajorities are 60% are needed to pass those. And all three of those very significant initiatives passed with tremendous amount of public support. So they're not frivolous.
Jean, I'm gonna read the first question from the floor. I'll just read it verbatim. And number 3, would it also allow opposing party members to influence the vote to elect a candidate that they are more favorable to be? In other words, party A voting for party B second or third best candidate in the hopes that they swing the victory for them and then face them in the final election.
Yeah, that's Sean Shaw has really dealt with that issue. Let me see if I have his, because I think I'm going to read something from one of his pieces. It says, an unforeseen outcome of this proposal is the loss of minority representation in both legislative chambers. Florida's constitution requires that state house and senate districts be drawn compactly and equal in population. Both the federal 1965 Voting Rights Act and 2010 Fair Districts Amendment to Florida's constitution require that racial minorities be able to elect candidates of their choosing and who reflect their communities. Black representation in the Florida legislature is secured in Democratic primaries in which Black voters form a significantly greater proportion of the electorate than in the population at large. So this then goes on to explain a little further based on the question that was just posed. The process by which all voters vote proposal diminishes Black voting power is simple. It would likely not result in Republican candidates defeating Black Democrats in overwhelmingly Democratic seats. Just like earlier efforts to implement multi-member districts or reliance on at-large districts, the inclusion of Republican and independent voters in a Black majority district would allow white Democratic candidates the opportunity to defeat a Black Democrat in the context of a larger general election electorate. This section outlines how that process happens in cabinet and legislative races. So forgive me for reading directly from his, but I think that he sort of lays the issue out more clearly than perhaps I could have.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for letting us put you on the spot. Del, we're almost out of time already.
Well, these are, I don't know if there's a simple answer to this, but just on amendment number 5 on the extension of the homestead exemption grace period, I'm going to call it a grace period. Is that extension something that the individual counties could enact by local ordinance?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. See, these are the questions as owners or home voters, we just don't know if that's the best solution.
Yeah, I mean,
if necessary.
Right. The whole issue is all of these issues should be left to the legislature and to home rule issues. If they're in the Constitution and circumstances change, communities, we have hurricanes, we have issues like the COVID-19 crisis, where if you cannot be determining your budgets and it's something that would have to go to the legislature, you would have to wait till they're in session, you would have to propose something, you would have to wait for an election, and then it would have to pass by 60% to undo something, which is why all of these tax type of issues really need to remain within the counties for budgeting and for the legislature to make tax changes more easily.
Well, thank you. You've done a yeoman's job over here, because I myself, I thought I understood them, but you've explained them even better. And so I appreciate that. And that's a real service. And I think you've put it up, but could you repeat the website where people can go for
Yes,
additional
I'm going to
information?
do a quick screen share, and then people can see.
Gene, before you do that, I've got one more question from the floor, if I could. If we vote yes for the minimum wage increase, is it possible that another amendment will follow to accelerate the pace of increase to sooner than 2026? Does a vote yes voice our concern for low minimum wage?
Well, without this in place, we have seen that the minimum wage has not gone up. This is not the perfect solution, obviously, but people are living in poverty. And there is more research. I mean, we can go into more detail that the research does show that when people do make more money, there is more money in the communities to spend, which would offset employers paying more, and there is stability. But yes, this is not the perfect solution. It doesn't mean one could not continue working more broadly on the issue of raising wages across the country. But the league is supportive because this is something that hasn't been addressed.
And sorry, you were going to show your slide with the website in case anybody wants more information.
Yes.
And just so everybody knows, Jean's a volunteer with the League of Women Voters. I think they're all volunteers.
We are all volunteers, yes.
And so they put this together and help us get this valuable information. They've done this several years in a row for us.
So I don't know if you can see, you can go to the website, hclwv.org, and the voter guides are there. I don't know if you see the voter guide, do you, this one? That lays out the yes and no. There is a digital and a print version of the constitutions of what we reviewed today, if you'd like to find that. And additionally, the league has for the entire country, it's vote411.org, and I'll share all of these with you, Bill, later if you want to share that on the website. But vote411.org also has all of candidate positions and anything related to voting. So you can put in where you live and it will bring up the candidates if you'd like more information. They have answered league questions and you can see their responses there. And it also answers all types of other voting questions. But we also highly recommend Hillsborough County. We are so fortunate to have a terrific supervisor of elections office. It is votehillsborough.org. Craig Latimer has wonderful videos there that show the safety of voting by mail, how the system works, how the system is safe. And there are 3 ways in Florida to vote. You can vote by mail, you can return your ballot, either in person to a voting site in a secure drop box that always has a clerk there next to the box. They are taken back to the supervisor of elections offices in the evening. They are not left outside of the hours at the early voting sites. And there are 26 in Hillsborough County available. And voting early starts, I believe, the 19th. Very long hours. Highly recommend it. Everyone will be given their own pen, so there isn't any spreading of germs. It's going to be very, very safe to do. And of course, you can always mail your ballot back. We recommend voting early and mailing back early if you choose to go that route.
I'm hearing that there are going to be really, really long lines. Hey, Jean, thanks so much for jumping in and doing this. We appreciate you volunteering and the information, and look forward to hopefully seeing you soon at one of our in-person events.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. That was very informative.
Thanks. Bye now.